technical session is on Code of Governance for NGOs. For this, we have very senior Chartered Accountant, CA, Vishnumurthy sir. I request Chairman of Bangalore Branch BT Sethi sir to please escort him and present him with a floral bouquet. Welcome, sir. To give a brief introduction about Vishnumurthy sir, he is a science and a law graduate. Presently, he is a fellow member of ICAI. He has his own independent practice and he practices under the name Vishnuram & Co. He has 35 years of practical experience in income tax, corporate affairs, GST, and many others. With this brief introduction, I once again welcome CA Vishnumurthy sir and over to you, sir.
Well, good evening to all of you. Weekend, day end, program end. I've been given this topic, Code of Governance for NGOs. Before that, I would like to profusely thank Mr. BT Sethi, Chairman, and other committee members of Bangalore branch of SIRC. Code of Governance for NGOs. I really do not know how many of you are familiar, at least you people are familiar with the Code of Governance for corporates, corporate governance. We are all familiar. What actually, when somebody understands, if you use the word code, what do you mean by code? Why don't we call it as an act? Why don't we call it as an act? We have got Income Tax Act. We have Civil Procedure Code or a Indian Penal Code or from our institute, Code of Ethics. So what is the difference between a code and an act? Why I'm asking this specific question? Because once we understand this concept, I think a lot of things will fall into place. You may not have to listen to this lecture. Why do you say so? Income Tax Act is a self-contained act. That is what we have been taught. Whatever is required to implement the income tax law in India is there in that act. So there cannot be anything wider than that, right? Even the penalty, the criminal aspect of not paying the taxes or evading the taxes, everything is there in that act. That is wide enough. There cannot be anything wider. Anyhow, the difference is like this. Code normally refers to something that is codified. That is to say, something is already there. Like if somebody understands this code of ethics, we are all familiar with those ethical requirements, are we not? Whenever we do an audit, we should not have any stake in the statement that we are auditing. Correct? We should not be connected with that entity which we are auditing, because if we are going to get connected and then also do the audit, there will always be conflict of interest, and conflict of interest need to be avoided. We are all familiar. So this is a normal rule which everybody understands. When similar rules are put in one place, what we call it as codification, we refer to it as a code. So when I'm going to talk about code of governance, it is the governance issues about which we are more or less clear, and that need to be put in one place or that need to be codified. There is nothing new about it. For example, when a meeting has to be held, we are all very familiar. It should be convened. A date has to be fixed. People who are eligible to participate have to be invited. I can write and put it in a proper format. Even otherwise, without that, we are all familiar. This is how it should be done. So code refers to something which is already there. And when you codify it, we use the word code. Enactment is normally a decision which is given the force of law. Code is a sort of decision which is already there, which is now being given a force of law. That is the difference. Now, coming to governance, what do you understand when somebody uses the word governance? First of all, it is contextual. In what context we are using the word governance? Here we are using it in the context of a NGO. So what actually governance refers to? When you say this company, corporate, this Reliance has a good governance practice, what does it mean? Or Tata's, generally it is given, they have good governance system. What does it mean? What do we understand? People are comfortable investing in a company which follows good governance practices. We're all familiar. What does it mean? Governance generally refers to the process of decision making. Underlining word is process. How do you take decisions? Along with that, there is one more smaller aspect. How do you implement those decisions? First, you talk about the process by which you make the decision. Then, how do you implement it? Together, you talk in terms of governance. So, code of governance is nothing but a set of rules which need to be followed in the process of taking decisions and implementing those decisions. The last one is NGO. Which is an NGO? What do you mean by NGO? Non-governmental organization. Our institute, will you call it a NGO? Why? It is not government. Then why don't we call it as a NGO? So what is that thing because of which our institute will not fall under the category of NGO? If you are saying non-governmental, definitely it is NGO.
Need not be NGOs.
Okay.
So our institute comes under NPO category, not
But,
an NGO.
but why it is not NGO?
NGOs generally are.
You are agreeing that it is not NGO. But why it is not NGO? That means there has to be some definite or some concept of a NGO. Our institute doesn't fit into that concept. So what is that criteria because of which our institute doesn't fit into that?
I do not know, sir, but
No, there is no legal concept here. This is what I said. Most of the things what we are going to talk about today, you cannot probably benchmark it to a statute. It is generally understood.
that's the words.
But you agree that NGO has certain definite connotation. We do not know what it is, and our institute doesn't fit into that thing. So what is that thing because of which you call a particular organization as a NGO?
Sir, NGO generally will be activist minded, which are more rebellious in nature, whereas NPOs like our institute are positive oriented to embark on.
Tata Group has got many trusts. They are NGOs. No, they got, what shall I say, trust for the welfare of tribals. Let us put, this is my idea. If it is agreeable, we can proceed further. one way of looking at is there are three sectors: private, government, which is the third one? Voluntary sector or service sector. So NGOs generally operate under this voluntary or service sector, correct? We are trying to differentiate between private, government and NGO. Objective of private enterprises is what? Government, control. Government is generally associated with the controlling or regulating. NGOs, service. Probably one more difference: government organizations survive on tax money. NGOs survive on voluntary contributions. So now we have some criteria to decide what an NGO is. Very difficult to define, but nevertheless we have a idea. Let us say a cooperative society. Will you call it a NGO? Why? Why cooperative society is not an NGO? So we are trying to put one more condition. NGOs exist for public. Cooperative society is existing for the benefit of its members. So who is the beneficiary will also be a criteria to decide whether an organization is NGO or not. There the criteria is what is your objective. NPO is contrasted with the organizations existing for profit. So if an organization doesn't exist for profit, you call it as a NPO. In this case, we are trying to contrast this with something from the government side. Government organizations survive on amount collected by way of taxes. NGOs survive. So now we know what we are talking about today. Code of governance for NGO. Why do you need a code of governance for NGOs? That is the next question. Why there is a need? Now, we said NGOs survive on money received from donors, and donors give money to NGOs to be used for the benefit of some third party, general public, correct? Now, when donors give money to the NGOs, they will have some interest where that money goes. They will try to impress upon the NGO that you spend this money to the members of this particular community, depending on who the donor is. He would like to influence the NGO insofar as where the money is spent. Coming from the beneficiary side, beneficiary will try to influence the governing body. Sorry, in the first place, the donor will try to impress upon the members of the governing body to spend that money for a particular community in which he is interested. Now, beneficiary will try to impress upon the governing body to spend the money on another community in which he is interested. If this governing body members were to listen, or if they were to be under the control either of the donors or of the beneficiaries, they'll be sandwiched. They will never be able to take decisions in a manner which is free and fair. So how do you ensure that they will never be in this dilemma? Make them completely free of this donor and beneficiary groups. Give them freedom. That is a normal thing what you would do. Now, governing body has the money. They can do whatever they want. Even though money came from somebody else, money is in their hand. Even though it was meant to be spent for somebody else, they have the power to decide on whom it has to be spent. There can be misuse. Do you agree? If left uncontrolled, there can be misuse. This is where the need for governance comes into picture. If you have a code of governance for this governing body, they will be constrained to use the money received from the donor in accordance with the directions given by the donor for the benefit of the beneficiaries without any fear or favor. What are the elements of this governance? What all things come to your mind when you talk in terms of governance? First and foremost is governing body. Now, when you talk in terms of governing body, there can be one governing body. We call it as a unitary structure, or there can be two-layered governing body. There can be a board of directors. There can be a board of executives. Fortunately, we do not have. We have only one board of directors or committee members, whatever you want to call it. So first of all, you should decide whether you will have a two-tier structure or you will have a unitary structure. What should be the qualification of these people who become members of this governing body? That also you'll have to spell it out. How often they have to meet? Again, it has to be spelled out. How long should their tenure be? Is it 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, life, whatever it is? Because unless these criteria are laid down properly, there can be utter chaos. First committee is fine. In case of a trust, the trustees who are appointed by the author will have the tenure that is specified in the trust deed. Thereafter, what happens? It's not under their control. In the meeting, who chairs the meeting? How often you will meet? Will you meet monthly? Will you meet quarterly? Will you meet once in 6 months or a year? What about the accounts? What about the audit? Would you like to have committees for these different activities? For example, in the case of NGOs, for programs, what kind of program we will implement? Would you like to have a programming committee? Would you like to have an audit committee? How often you will present your financial performance? How often you will provide your, what do you call this social activity performance? In what format you will provide the details? To whom all you will give it? So all these things become very relevant in the context of governance. So you must have some set of rules. But today you see in the Indian context, how do you ensure that these governance points are followed by these NGOs? Let us first take the case of trust. Do we have a trust act which are applicable for charitable trusts in India? I'm sure somebody must have touched about it. Let us say in Karnataka, there is a trust which is running a school. There is, let us say, there is absolutely no governance. There is a one-man show. He decides what to do and only that is done, nothing else is done. Taking recourse to which law you will prevent him try to prevent him from doing this? Is there any act? Still, we do not have the act. I am not getting into the next step. Why we do not have this act? Because you know who are the people who are running such schools. Private Trust Act. Yeah, let me, you good that you raise the topic. Trust and trustees is coming under what is called concurrent list. You are aware of this list under the Constitution. That is who has the power to make law with respect to a particular subject. For example, as far as sales tax or VAT was concerned, it was the state which had the power. Power to levy tax on sale of goods was on the state. Power to levy tax on services was on the center. That is why we had to amend the Constitution so that state could tax both sale of goods as well as supply of services, or supply of goods as well as supply of services. Similarly, center also could levy the tax, because you have got list 1, which is called as the union list. Whatever items are there in the union list, the power to make law in respect of those items rests with the parliament. You have got state list. Whatever items are there in the state list, state legislature has the power to make law. Then you have a concurrent list. In respect of it, both state as well as the parliament has the power to make law. Trust comes under the concurrent list. There is one Indian Trust Act, which is not a act passed by parliament. It is a pre-independence act, 1882 act, when British were there. Unfortunately, that act doesn't apply to charitable trusts. It applies only to private trusts. And the trusts that we are talking of are all charitable trusts. So that Trust Act doesn't apply to these trusts what we are talking of. So none of the provisions of that Trust Act will apply to this. There is no act made by the state except in Maharashtra. Maharashtra, there is one act as far as these trusts are concerned. In now other state, we have this act. You don't get registered under Trust Act. It is under the Indian Registration Act. It is called as voluntary registration. If you want to register, you register. If there is immovable property, you register it, because transfer of immovable property by one person to another has to be done only by a registered document. Trust is treated as a separate person. So property transfer from the donor to the trust has to be registered with sub-registrar. It is not registering the trust. It is actually registering the property. So as far as trusts are concerned, there is no law based on which you can take some action to them. Now, all of you must have heard about breach of trust, which is considered as a serious offense. If there is any problem with the trust, for example, the beneficiaries are not given the benefit of the trust, what is the course available to those beneficiaries? Or the donor has given the donation to the trust, the trust doesn't apply it for the purpose for which it is given. What is the course available to him? You'll be shocked to know that there is only one provision, that is under the Civil Procedure Code. Section 92 of the Civil Procedure Code provides that you can file a suit in a court of law, High Court. So if you are aggrieved by mismanagement of the trustees, you will have to file a case against them in a court. There is no other statute under which you can take remedies. Then how do you even enforce governance issues in a trust situation? So in a trust, governance actually means nothing. Now come to the next method, which is the other act under which normally these charitable organizations are registered, Societies Registration Act. If you read Societies Registration Act, of course, it talks of electing a governing body. It talks of accounts. It talks of audit. If there is mismanagement or misgovernance or whatever you want to call it, what is the remedy that is available? Management has to be superseded by the government. You can imagine how difficult it is. So even in a society scenario, ensuring proper governance is a mirage. The last of the structure that is available for charitable organization is guarantee company. You are aware, under the 1956 Act, we had the Section 25 companies whose objects are charitable and they need not use the word limited at the end of their name. For example, Azim Premji Foundation, it is registered under the Companies Act, but they don't use the word limited. They have a license that Section 25 talks in terms of giving license to that companies to do away with this word limited. Now, under the 2013 Act, you have got Section 8, under which license can be obtained and these companies can be registered as a company limited by guarantee of the members. Now, under the Companies Act, there are certain provisions which deal with management, no doubt about it. But full-scale governance for companies is mandated where? It is mandated in the listing agreement that the companies enter into with the stock exchanges. In other words, governance matters are applicable to companies only if they are listed for trading on the stock exchange. You might have heard about clause 49, listing agreement. What is this listing agreement? You are entering into an agreement with the stock exchange to enable buying and selling of your shares on the floor of the stock exchange. In that situation, listed companies, if they do not follow this governance principle, then stock exchanges have the power either to penalize the directors, company, as well as delist the company from the stock exchange. This is the only method by which governance can be ensured in this case of a company. Now, all these guarantees companies, none of them are registered with stock exchange for trading. There is no trading that is taking place in a guarantee company. So clause 49, which deals with the corporate governance, is not applicable for guarantee companies. Therefore, even though we can make a big list of components of governance in an NGO, none of them can be enforced. The unfortunate part. So, what do you do? It provides, yeah, correct.
Having a board of directors committee.
Agreed. That is, in a guarantee company, you can do that.
You have to do that.
You have to do that. But that is very rudimentary in a sense. Publishing quarterly report, you don't have the requirement at all. Only if you are a listed company, you publish it quarterly.
Yes.
So whatever you have done will be known maybe after 12 months or 1 year. One of the principles of governance is to keep the stakeholder informed as soon as possible.
Who is the stakeholders? The beneficiaries?
Donors. Donors are also one of the major stakeholders. Beneficiaries are also major stakeholders. I agree, there are certain provisions, but it is, see, governance is a very what shall I say, high level word, very decent word. It is not something much bigger than management, much bigger than administration. So you would expect when you say disclosure requirement, that disclosure has to be very timely. A thing which is not disclosed timely is no disclosure at all. I don't deny there is.
The related party transaction will apply
We
for government companies also. You cannot do it through for the trustees or governance board members, relatives. You cannot give loans.
you
this thing.
cannot do it. I agree, it is there in the act. But if it happens, when will you know? Whereas if it is a listed company, you imagine a company which is listed, every quarter they have to file quarterly report. Correct? And there is a continuous monitoring by the stock exchange authorities. If there is a meeting held before the end of the day, meeting report has to be filed with the stock exchange. You imagine these guarantee companies?
It will happen after 12 months only.
Huh?
But at the end of the 12 months,
Correct.
if the registrar or the auditor finds that these lapses
Fine.
have happened,
Huh?
definitely that operation mismanagement will apply and the company is managed.
Then you'll go to NCLT.
Yes.
How long it takes? You imagine a listed company, immediate delisting will be ordered. Everybody will come running. Show cause notice will go directly to the managing director.
It will create adverse publicity in the general public amongst
Prices will fall. What happens in a guarantee company?
So donors will not come. Like, Arey, there is a problem here.
But the donors will realize when?
After 12 months.
After they would have given the next donation. So all that I'm saying, there is no effective governance regulation today. This is where the government has stepped in. In 2019-20 budget, anything? I think you can take this. But now that's what under the, like as far as trusts are concerned, if they are not, first of all, there is nothing that is prescribed that you should comply with this. So question of non-compliance doesn't arise. I may set down certain requirements. Your trust should be run like this, but it doesn't have any statutory force. Now, when it comes to societies, if there is non-compliance, only thing is superseding the managing committee by the government. If it is a company, if there is non-compliance, yes, you can complain, operation mismanagement, whatever it is, to the NCLT, National Company Law Tribunal. It is a very time-consuming process. It is as good as those remedies are not available. Let us put it that way. So government has realized this situation in the recent past during COVID. People are not very comfortable when a trust or anybody, for example, charitable organization that asks you for a donation, you are generally skeptic unless that charitable organization has already earned a great goodwill. For example, a trust from Tata Trust. You feel very comfortable, right? Or a Asim Premji Foundation. You feel comfortable. Why? During COVID, many of these organizations were in need of a lot of funds, but were not able to raise. This is where the government has stepped in. 2019-20 budget, if I'm right, our finance minister, she made one announcement. I don't know how many of you actually noted it. She floated the idea of what is called as social stock exchange. You have heard of normal stock exchange where shares are bought and sold. She mooted the idea of a social stock exchange. Now, social stock exchange is a place where NGOs will be listed for trading. NGOs will be allowed to issue shares, zero coupon bonds, other securities as well, which people can subscribe for, buy, sell. A lot of things are possible. Now, on the social stock exchange, if any NGO wants to get itself listed, it has to sign an agreement which is called as the listing agreement, like what we have for normal corporates. Under the listing agreement, there will be a paragraph or a particular condition saying that thou shalt follow the following governance matters. Quarterly reporting would be there. Impact audit will be there. So many such criteria will be there for NGOs. So if somebody is willing to do that, they can get themselves listed. Once they get listed there, then the stakeholders, that is the donors, feel very comfortable because there will be regular flow of information because they are supposed to file those information with the stock exchange. So it is there in public domain as and when it happens. This is something that has been mooted, and already NSE has approved the formation of this social stock exchange. It will be a segment of the present stock exchange where NGOs will be allowed to be listed. Now, once this listing takes place, you get an idea whether this particular organization, NGO, deserves to receive contribution from your side. It becomes easy for you to decide whether to give or not to give. Along with that, there will be other requirements, whether the particular NGO has complied with the listing agreement, whether it has complied with the code of governance for NGOs. This is supposed to generate a lot of opportunities for chartered accountants. That is why suddenly this topic has gained momentum. Otherwise, I was also a little surprised when they asked me to speak about it. In 2009, Institute has brought out this publication, Code of Governance for NGOs. It is almost 13 years. Suddenly, everybody is talking. Code of Governance for NGOs is a hot topic. I was wondering why it has become a hot topic all of a sudden. This is the reason why it has become hot topic. It is still in the formation stage, let us admit it. What are all the governance issues that they are going to address in that listing agreement? And what will be the reporting requirement? What all securities will be allowed to be issued by these NGOs? How will be the mechanism insofar as buying and selling of those securities are concerned? Correct. No. Even for NGOs, to become qualified to get listed, one is they must have a social intent. Another is that sustainability. These two are the things. It cannot be a one-off project. If a NGO is planning only a one-off project, it may not be eligible to get itself listed on the stock exchange. First of all, social intent. Social intent, they're all high-sounding words. It is nothing but your object should be charitable. Education is a social intent. Relief of poor is definitely a social intent. Health, present day concern is about health. They're all social intents. The object should be social intent and that sustainability. With these two twin conditions being present in their memorandum, they are able to get themselves listed on the stock exchange. See whether I have covered whatever I wanted. Yeah.
Who are NPO?
Correct.
So will they bother about this?
Yeah, I think you missed this point. I was trying to explain where is the need for this governance, code of governance. The problem that generally, like you rightly put it, faced by NGOs, governing body. Donors want the money donated to the NGO to be spent for a particular purpose. I am putting it very bluntly. They say it should be spent for this particular community. On the other hand, beneficiaries, they may have a different agenda that it should be spent not for that community, but for this community. So both can try to control or effectively influence the governing body. So unless you make the governing body independent, they'll be torn between these two intents. That is why generally we grant independence to the governing body. Now money is with them, resources are with the governing body. They have total independence. Next natural disaster that happens is mismanagement. In order to prevent this mismanagement, we have brought this concept of governance, code of governance. So they should conduct themselves in accordance with code of governance, in which case they'll be able to exercise the freedom granted to them in a proper manner.
Because if this Amnesty International, the overseas body will be giving donations to Amnesty International in India.
Correct.
So the agenda, policy, process,
Yes.
procedures, even voucher approval would have been decided by the overseas donor.
Correct.
So
Correct.
the leeway available to the Indian governing body
Correct.
will be next to nothing. They have to
I
just
fully agree.
implement what your donor has instructed you to do.
And why that Amnesty International India is willing to dance to the tunes of that donor, because he doesn't have any donors in India.
In India, yes.
Now, if you provide him a facility where he can raise funds and wouldn't depend entirely on that international agency, then he will start dictating terms to the donor. Boss, we are a respectable NGO. We are listed on the social stock exchange. We are not at your mercy. If you want some credibility, you want to tell your stakeholders that we have done such and such work in India, we are the right people because we are one of the best listed NGOs in India. You look at how the equation changes.
But the Indian governing body
Yeah.
thinks it is part of the overseas donor.
No,
So
no,
I'm
today,
happy to be
today it can
instructed
so
of-
happen, Indian donors who are contributing to that Indian outfit, they will dictate terms, what should be the composition of the governing body of that Indian outfit. In which case the language they are going to use will be totally different from the language they were hitherto using it. Yeah, I think with that, I have covered most of the things that I wanted to say. Is there any other questions that you would like to know about?
the previous session, sir. I think, sir, Dr. Suresh sir was mentioning, if you are a public servant, you are a IAS officer, serving IAS officer or something, then you cannot be running a NPO and receiving funds through FCRA for the organization that you are managing. This is what I understood from Suresh sir's
Okay,
thing.
okay.
This lawyers collective, Indira Jaising was the additional
Correct,
solicitor
correct,
general.
correct. I remember.
And she was receiving funds when she was ASG, receiving foreign funds under FCRA.
Correct.
Is there a violation of the code, violation of the law?
FCRA.
Huh? Is it
FCRA. I'm sure it is. Definitely it is there. Definitely it is there.
But she's a lawyer by herself, senior advocate. She must be aware, no, sir, more than anybody else.
Well, that is a very personal thing. So generally what happens when I know the law, it depends on me to focus what is there in the law and what is not covered with by that law. You understand? There are certain clients, you can tell them this is what is required to be complied by you under the Companies Act, and he will comply. There is another set of clients who will say, I agree, I heard you also. Tell me what happens if I don't comply?
Not other set of
What are
clients,
the
90% of the clients,
consequences? What are the consequences
if I don't follow.
if I don't follow? Because I want to know whether I can manage the consequences, then I would like to break the law.
Either it is only fine or prosecution.
Yeah, so that's similarly, there can be advocate who knows the law to comply it. There might be advocates who want to know about the law so that they can break it. Anyhow, FCRA, I think these days it is really getting tightened. You know, they have appointed State Bank of India, New Delhi branch as the nodal agency. All the foreign donations will have to first hit that account. It has to be reported there. Thereafter, it has to go to the account of the NGOs.
So FIRC will come only in that branch.
Only in that bank, but thereafter it can be transferred to other
So
branches. where they
government
are
can
maintaining
find
the
out
account.
from one source what is the all over India receipt.
Exactly, exactly. Yes. It's going on. Online questions. What is that question?
Sir, is it mandatory to conduct AGM of trust if yes?
See, when you are talking of mandatory, you are asking whether under such and such act there is a requirement to hold a AGM. Like I told you, as far as trusts are concerned, today we do not have any enactment, be it central or state, under which there is a legal requirement to hold a AGM. It is a requirement if the trust deed provides so. In other words, if the author of the trust has mandated the trustees that you shall meet once a year, then it is a legal requirement. Now that takes us to the next question. When the querist is asking, is there a requirement to conduct a AGM? In a trust situation, you have only one class called the trustees. There is nothing like members. So there is nothing like annual general meeting or AGM for the trustees. Trustees are the managing committee members. They keep meeting. There is no annual general meeting or members meeting. So that question itself becomes a little irrelevant. They are not trusts, they are societies. Trust will not have members. Trust will have the author, the trustees, and the beneficiaries. Beneficiaries are not members. That's all. So with that, I must thank you for a patient hearing on a Saturday evening. Thank you very much. Good day. A nice weekend.
Thank you so much, Mr. Murthy, sir, for covering in detail code of governance for NGOs. I request Bangalore Branch Chairman B.T. Shetty, sir, to please come forward and present memento as a token of gratitude. Thank you very much, sir. And I thank once again all the members for your active participation. So please keep listening to Gnanarjuna Empowering Excellence web series as well as physical cum hybrid mode. So thank you once again, one and all.